Most of us will remember the feeling of waiting for a Saturday morning so that we could watch the cartoons that we loved, and it was usually a perfect way to begin the weekend. Some of these cartoons are still famous today, but as grown-ups, some people have attached strange theories to them that may just ruin your childhood. Number 10. Scooby-Doo is surely one of the most famous cartoons ever produced. In every episode, the gang and their beloved Great Dane run into trouble of some kind, usually involving a ghost or other paranormal entity. And by the end, the villain is unmasked and revealed to be a mere mortal before they're taken away to prison. Over the years, the show has had several strange theories attached to it, mostly because of the show's often dark appearance and the strange characters that the gang comes across, not to mention the fact that Scooby can talk. One such theory suggests that Shaggy, Velma, Daphne, Fred, and Scooby are actually fugitives on the run from the law, since they decided to leave America, fleeing to Canada to avoid being drafted for the Vietnam War. This is said to finally explain why they never seem to have a set destination in mind when traveling in their van called the Mystery Machine, since they're merely trying to avoid being tracked down by the police. Since Shaggy is seen as somewhat of a flower child, it's said that he was dead set against the war and decided to take his dog Scooby with him when he went on the run. The theory then suggests that Fred was in military school, but when his draft number came up, he decided to go AWOL instead. Daphne is said to be Fred's high school sweetheart, and so she decided to follow him when he absconded from his military duty. And Velma is an anti-war activist who chose to follow the gang wherever they went just to get away from the war. But there is another theory that many people see as plausible, despite it being a mere fan theory. It suggests that the show takes place during an era of economic depression, which explains why most of the buildings seen in the background are run down and uncared for. The Depression had a severe effect on everyone, including the rich and famous, who were then forced to eke out an existence as criminals who all had very specific skills. But since they were so well known, they were forced to hide their identities by wearing monster disguises. This ensures that no one can blame them for the crimes that are committed, unless, of course, the gang manages to stumble across the mystery and solve it, unmasking the true perpetrator in the process. Since all 4 human members of the gang are still teenagers, this also explains why they never attend school, and instead drive around the country looking for cases to solve. They're also said to live in the van together, since they don't have any homes to go back to, and have been rendered homeless by the dire state of the economy. Could this also be why Shaggy is always hungry? Since the gang never gets paid for any of the mysteries they solve, it would be exceedingly hard to afford any type of food, and hence Shaggy takes every opportunity he gets to fill his and Scooby's stomachs. These theories paint a very bleak picture of the gang's lives, but they do explain some questions that fans have had for decades since the show first aired. Number 9. Another lesser known and yet still very fondly remembered cartoon from back in the day is Inspector Gadget. It follows the exploits of a bumbling half-cyborg police inspector who manages to solve crimes with the help of Penny Brown, his niece, and her dog, Brain. Together, they attempt to stop the evil plots of Dr. Claw, though Gadget is usually saved from precarious situations by Brain, while Penny manages to solve most of the crimes, unbeknownst to Gadget and the rest of the world. The cartoon series proved popular enough to spawn a live-action movie that starred Matthew Broderick in the title role. But it's also been the subject of some strange fan theories over the years, and the show is even said to have predicted the future on a few occasions. Some examples of this include the fact that Penny seems to be using a device similar to an iPad or other type of tablet in just about every episode. And considering that the show's last episode originally aired in 1985, this is something that would not have been available at the time. Then there's the fact that Gadget's car, the Gadget Mobile, is a self-driving vehicle, another piece of tech that would not have been available in the 80s, but has now become a reality in modern times. Added to this is the fact that Gadget often relies on the car's GPS system to get him where he wants to go, often with hilarious results as the system is hacked by Dr. Claw, prompting Penny to jump into action. All the while, Gadget is completely unaware that things have gone awry, which many people see as a prediction that will always assume that technology will work correctly, only to be proven wrong time and time again. One aspect of the show that's always kept us enthralled was the fact that we never got to see the villain, Dr. Claw's face. No one had any idea what he looked like, and furthermore, we were left at a loss as to why we weren't allowed to see his face. But one fan theory looks to explain this one strange detail. It suggests that Dr. Claw and Gadget are the same person, and that Gadget is a recreation of Claw, who, according to the theory, used to be a police detective who was involved in a horrific accident that disfigured his face. It further states that Penny was Claw's niece, and after hearing about his accident, she sets about creating a crime-fighting cyborg with gadgets built in, completely ignoring the fact that her uncle is still alive. In many of the episodes, Penny is captured by the villain, but she always manages to escape somehow, and theorists have posited that this is because Claw recognizes her as his niece, and hence would never harm her. He still cares a great deal about Penny, and so he doesn't do anything about the fact that she constantly foils his evil plans. But there is also another theory stating that Gadget and Claw are the same person. This is said to be proven in the opening theme song visuals, when Gadget spins Claw's chair around, only to find that he isn't there, and a moment later, an explosive device detonates while he's handcuffed to a fake metal arm. These may just be theories that have been dreamed up by fans of the show, but they certainly do answer many of the questions we had growing up. Number 8. When it comes to famous cartoons, few can boast about the size of a fan base that the Flintstones had during its prime, and even today it's fondly remembered by those who spent hours watching this prehistoric family and their antics. Not only were the characters very entertaining, but they also had gadgets that usually took the form of animals around their houses, and offices which brought an extra element of comedy and whimsy to the show. While we all know that the cartoon is set during the Stone Age, there is a theory that states they're actually from a far more modern time, and in fact may be living in a future where the world is a very different place. The first clue lies in the cartoon's opening theme song. One line contains the lyrics, quote, "They're the modern Stone Age family," which we always assumed meant that they were from the distant past. But what if it meant that they're from a Stone Age that hasn't happened yet? They may have had to reinvent tools using animals, and since the theme song also states they're a page right out of history, it might be that they're living like people from the first Stone Age rather than being a part of it. This would explain why the characters understand the concept of things like blenders, cars, earth-moving equipment, and electric razors, since those items come from our time, which would be the Flintstones' past. Then there's the theory surrounding the character, the Great Gazoo, who's an alien that has been exiled to Earth after it was discovered that he'd created a doomsday device. Keep in mind that Gazoo also appears in another cartoon, Doc Dodgers, which is set in the 24th century, and hence it's suggested that he traveled back to the Second Stone Age after his exile. One of the wildest theories, though, suggests that the Flintstones and the Jetsons, a family who lives in the future, actually live in the same era. It's stated that Earth was decimated by a cataclysmic event that forced humans to retreat and live in the sky. But some people chose to stay behind and now live like cavemen, while the rest of humanity ride around in flying cars and live in floating houses. Number 7. While the Powerpuff Girls proved to be immensely popular with cartoon viewers during the 90s and early 2000s, Samurai Jack, which first aired in 2001, wasn't for everyone since it was often seen as repetitive, but the show still had many fans who never missed an episode. The shows couldn't be more different. Samurai Jack centers on a samurai from ancient Japan who's flung through time by his enemy, Aku, in the moment before he's defeated, and as the show progresses, he attempts to find his way back to his own time, while also looking to destroy Aku, who wants to take over the world. While the Powerpuff Girls also fight against evil villains, the show is set in one location, their hometown of Townsville, where they were created using the mysterious chemical X by Professor Utonium, a genius scientist who also serves as their parent. Where Jack is usually pitted against robotic enemies that are controlled by Aku, the Powerpuff Girls fight against living creatures, such as Mojo Jojo, a super intelligent monkey, Him, a demonic entity with a high-pitched voice, Fuzzy Lumpkins, a Bigfoot-like creature, and Sedusa, who's based on the Gorgon Medusa. In one episode of Samurai Jack, he ends up traveling through a rundown town that many people think closely resembles Townsville, and it's been suggested that the two shows take place in the same universe. This theory is strengthened by the fact that the same billboard advertising dog food can be seen in both shows, both times during each show's first season. The ad features a talking dog, which would have been rather strange during the Powerpuff Girls' time, but has become the norm in the Samurai Jack cartoons. Then there's the fact that Samurai Jack and Professor Utonium share some very similar features, leading some fans to speculate that the two characters may actually be the same man. They both wear black and white outfits, they have pale skin, and even share the same hairstyle with the exception of Jack's ponytail. Both have dark, thick eyebrows and broad shoulders, but Jack, while being a peaceful samurai, is always forced to become violent, whereas Professor Utonium is usually at work in his lab. The theory here states that the Powerpuff Girls were destroyed by a coup at some point, after which Professor Utonium decided to take up a sword to avenge them. But others have suggested that the professor could merely be a distant relative of Jack's. People have also noticed that the two cartoons' villains share some very similar traits. The monkey, Mojo Jojo, became a villain after he came into contact with the chemical X that's later used to create the girls. After this happened, he started to change into the green and black genius that we know. But fans also noticed that he has the same colors as Aku, and that they share a similar accent. Considering that Aku also emerged from the mysterious black goo, it's the opinion of many fans that these two universes are one and the same. But one comic book featuring Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory added another theory into the mix. The very first issue features a discussion between Dexter, the Powerpuff Girls, and Professor Utonium, during which Dexter explains that Samurai Jack's world is one that connects the multiverse. When asked about this, the show's creator stated that the two shows aren't set in the same universe, but he declined to explain the origins of the mysterious chemical X, or why the same billboard can be seen in episodes of the two shows. Then there's the theory that the two cartoons take place in the same era and the same locations, but that the characters are variations of each other, Jack being Utonium and Aku being Mojo Jojo. Whereas the girls face mortal enemies that try to destroy their town, Jack faces off against robots that are under Aku's command in an attempt to stop him from traveling back to his own time, where he can finally deliver the final blow with his sword, ending Aku's reign of terror forever. Jack is constantly trying to find a way back to his own time and his family in order to protect them. Professor Utonium is always very protective over the girls, despite the fact that they have superpowers. Many people have taken this to mean that the two characters are indeed one and the same, but that they either live in different dimensions or during different eras. It's a debate that is still to be settled and will likely rage on for some time to come. Number 6. Winnie the Pooh is another beloved cartoon that's known the world over, and many people consider its quirky and varied characters to be some of the best ever created, since each brings something different to the show. Pooh is always on the hunt for honey. His friend Piglet is of a nervous disposition. Eeyore seems to have a lack of lust for life. Tigger is always bouncing around and up for an adventure. Owl constantly impresses everyone with his knowledge, and Rabbit looks to keep everyone in check, though he rarely succeeds. The show focuses on friendships and how we're able to help each other on a daily basis, but some fans have created their own theory, which suggests that each character suffers from a different mental disorder, and strangely it makes sense. Pooh is always obsessed with honey and is always on the lookout for a way to acquire it, often resulting in his head getting stuck in a jar. When he can't find any, he gets anxious or sad, suggesting that he suffers from an eating disorder of some kind. He also finds it very hard to focus on one task at a time, or complete the one he's busy with, leading some people to believe that he also suffers from attention deficit disorder, since he also becomes hyper-focused on finding honey. Piglet suffers from low self-esteem and anxiety that, according to the theory, is the result of an injury that he sustained in the past. This same injury is said to be the cause of his stutter, and some fans suggest that he might also be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Then there's Owl, who can often be seen with a book at hand, but on many occasions, he forgets what he was reading about or what he was doing. In one episode, he reads the word school, but pronounces it as skull, which suggests that he suffers from dyslexia or short-term memory loss. Tigger finds it hard to sit still at the best of times, and is happiest when he can bounce around on his tail, while usually leaving destruction in his wake. Because of this, it's said that he also suffers from ADHD. Rabbit serves as the voice of reason in the group, but he often loses his temper with the other characters when they cause havoc in his burrow, or when they bother him while he's busy with a task. He also likes to have everything just so, and hence it's thought that he may be suffering from obsessive-compulsive disorder, while living among a group of chaotic characters that are very often frustrating to him. Kanga is Rue's mother, and she can often be seen overly protective of him. On some occasions, she refuses to let him make his own decisions, and some fans think she might have social anxiety disorder. Rue, on the other hand, lives life head-on with very little regard for his own safety. He's often completely unaware that he's in danger, and some think he has an unhealthy habit of sitting in Kanga's pouch. These traits have them convinced that he's autistic. Eeyore is probably most people's favorite character because of his strange demeanor. He's always falling behind and becomes sad when he loses his pin-on tail. He never gets excited about anything, and generally has a dreary outlook on life, suggesting to some people that he suffers from depression. Then lastly, there's Christopher Robin, the group's human friend. While he may seem like a normal boy to most of us, it's been suggested that he suffers from schizophrenia since none of the other characters are real and only exist in his mind. Each character has different traits depending on the mood that Christopher is in at that particular moment. The reality is that these characters are based on the author's son and stuffed animals, but the theory that they each represent a different mental disorder doesn't seem that far-fetched, despite many of them being undiscovered when Winnie the Pooh was created. Number 5. May of 1999 saw the first appearance of SpongeBob SquarePants, a cartoon character that took the world by storm overnight and is still listed among many people's most loved or most hated characters. While most parents found SpongeBob to be irritating, mostly thanks to his strange laugh, kids around the world instantly fell in love with the show and its quirky characters. And soon it was a global phenomenon with merchandise being released, movies being made, and quite unbelievably, it's still running today, boasting an impressive 277 episodes. The main characters are, of course, SpongeBob, who lives in a pineapple, and has a snail called Gary as a pet. Patrick, a starfish, is SpongeBob's dim-witted best friend, who lives under a rock, and the two love nothing better than jellyfishing. Squidward lives between the two friends and is constantly losing his temper at their exploits that often end up involving and inconveniencing him to the point where he's forced to throw them out of the house. Mr. Krabs is the money-hungry owner of the Krusty Krab restaurant, where SpongeBob works as a fry cook, and he's usually embroiled in a battle with his archenemy Plankton, who wants nothing more than to steal Krabs' secret formula used in his burgers. Just outside of the town of Bikini Bottom lives Sandy, a squirrel who's built a waterproof enclosure that she calls home. She can often be seen conducting experiments or practicing karate with SpongeBob. The show is rich with strange and unique characters, which is likely why it became so popular. But a fan theory suggests something more sinister, that each of the characters represents one of the 7 deadly sins. Since SpongeBob seems to have no concept of personal boundaries and no qualms about expressing his love to anyone and everyone around him, it's been suggested that he represents lust, though in a far more innocent way than we're accustomed to. Patrick has no job and sometimes spends days lounging around under his rock, either sleeping or watching television. Therefore, it's said that he represents sloth, since he seems to have no lust for life. Squidward usually fails to keep his emotions in check, especially when he's aggravated by his neighbors, and this often results in him yelling at them or taking more extreme measures, suggesting that he's the representation of wrath. Gary, SpongeBob's pet snail, is seen on more than one occasion tucking into a massive bowl of snail food that should theoretically last him weeks, and so he must represent the sin of gluttony. Mr. Krabs is obsessed with money, not just making money, but keeping every cent that he makes. He'll stop at nothing to acquire more, often at the expense of some of the characters that he calls friends. He represents the deadly sin of greed. Plankton wishes to have a restaurant that's just as successful as the Krusty Krab, and rather than improving the food that he sells at his restaurant, the Chum Bucket, he dedicates his life to stealing Krabs' secret formula. Therefore, he represents envy. Lastly, Sandy the Squirrel has an ego fit for a king, and at the same time, she's highly competitive in whatever she does. She often boasts about the fact that she hails from Texas, and suggests that it's better than any other place on Earth, making her the perfect candidate for the sin of pride. These characters were likely not created to represent these sins, but it's uncanny how well each sin fits with their personalities, and why this theory has become so popular. Number 4. Tom and Jerry, the cat and mouse duo, who are always looking to outsmart each other, first appeared on television in the 1940s, and since then they've been synonymous with the history of cartoons. The show was produced for more than 60 years, with the final episode being in 2005, and all the while it's remained as popular as ever, not only among kids but also among adults who remembered it from their childhoods. The premise of each episode is usually very similar. Jerry would go on the hunt for some cheese or another snack in the house where they lived, while Tom did his utmost to stop him, often at the orders of his owner, whose face is never shown. Jerry is usually the victor, since he easily outsmarts Tom, who often has to deal with a gray bulldog called Spike, who lives in the house and the yard. On some occasions, Jerry and Spike team up against Tom, who always seems to get the short end of the stick. It's a rivalry that has spanned decades and brought untold hours of joy into our households. But a new theory suggests that not everything may have been as innocent as we've always believed. While he may have become accustomed to the idea that Tom is always trying to eat Jerry, not only for his own pleasure, but to make his owner happy, the theory states that they may have been friends all along, and that their rivalry was just a facade. It all started with a Reddit post in which someone asked this perplexing question. Before long, people were coming up with all kinds of theories to support the suggestion that they were buddies, one of which has gained more traction than others. It's said that Tom was bought by the house's owner when he discovered that a mouse was living in the walls. Tom's sole responsibility is to get rid of the rodent, and at first glance, this is what he does. But there may be more to this tale than meets the eye. Some fans think that Tom and Jerry eventually formed a bond, and eventually Tom started protecting Jerry. When we see Tom chasing him through the house and concocting wild schemes to trap him for dinner, it's actually just a way to fool Tom's owner. Since Tom doesn't want to get rid of Jerry, he pretends to hate him, knowing that if he just lays around the house like a normal cat, his owner would find a different, more capable replacement that would likely end up ending Jerry's life. One fan pointed out that during one episode, the pair can be seen relaxing together, and only when someone else enters the scene do they start their routine of chasing each other around the house. In another, they team up to defeat a mechanical cat that's been brought in to replace Tom, after his owner becomes fed up with his inability to catch Jerry. On another occasion, Tom erroneously believes that Jerry's life has been ended by a falling ceiling fan, and he can be seen mourning his passing. Other fans have pointed out that Tom manages to catch Jerry on a number of occasions, only to set him free again or accidentally let him escape, though it seems that this may not have been as accidental as we originally thought. Number 3. Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner will forever remain two of the most iconic cartoon characters ever created. The show features very little dialogue and instead relies on facial expressions and sound to entertain its viewers. The premise is a very simple one. In a landscape based on the southwestern United States deserts, a coyote does his best to capture a roadrunner for a meal, but thanks to the bird's immense speed and superior intellect, he usually ends up falling off cliffs, running into walls, being crushed under Acme anvils and pianos, or in some cases, simply giving up. While some of his plans seem destined to work, they always backfire in a spectacular fashion, and even the promise of free bird seed isn't usually enough to keep the Roadrunner from speeding past him before disappearing into the distance. In one episode titled Soup or Sonic, the coyote does manage to catch the Roadrunner, but during the episode, he'd shrunk down to a tiny size and is now at a loss as to how to proceed. He then holds up a couple of signs to the audience that read, "You always wanted me to catch him, now what do I do?" The show is still popular today among kids and adults alike, but a fan theory has been put forward that paints the cartoon in a very different and much darker light. While it seems that Wile E. Coyote is more than happy to start each day with the promise of a Roadrunner for a meal, the theory suggests that he may be a lot less happy than we imagined, since he's actually in his own personal hell. This is represented by the hot desert sands and the sun blazing from above. Added to this is the fact that he comes so very close to catching his prey on many occasions, but the Roadrunner is always just out of his grasp. When he eventually succeeds, he's still unable to follow through with his plans due to being shrunk down, suggesting that he is in true torment. The theory is loosely based on the Greek mythology of Tantalus, who was brought to a river that would always recede when he tried to get a drink of water. When he tries to pick a piece of fruit to satisfy his hunger, the branches would lift up, often out of his reach. It's said that he's been sent to hell as punishment for his arrogance and gluttony while he was still alive, and now he's constantly humiliated by the Roadrunner and is unable to catch any food. But this is not the only theory associated with the show. It's been suggested that the coyote isn't always the same one, since he has access to an army of clones that are able to take his place. These clones are seen as expendable, and hence he has no issue with them falling off cliffs and being injured by the devices he concocts. One equally outlandish theory states that the coyote is actually a tester of Acme products that are yet to be released. He uses each of these products, such as anvils, roller skates, explosives, etc., to gain an advantage, but they never function as they should, suggesting that they're mere prototypes. All of these theories are obviously meant to be taken with a pinch of salt, but they remain entertaining theories nonetheless, giving us a slightly different, if somewhat skewed perspective when we watch them again later on. Number 2. Cars is a series of animated movies created by Pixar Animation Studios, which features several cars that are able to speak to each other while taking part in races and other wacky adventures. The movies proved to be so successful that a massive amount of merchandise was released, including clothing, lunchboxes, beach towels, stationery, stickers, and just about anything imaginable. To date, 3 films have been released, and a 4th is expected to be produced in the future. It will no doubt prove to be just as popular as its predecessors, since it appeals to kids of all ages. But one theory is reserved for adults only, since it paints a very dark picture of the Cars universe, and surprisingly, it's been confirmed by the movie's creator. While many people presumed that this is a world where cars are sentient and where humans don't exist, others have pointed out that humans may once have been present, but that they've been done away with. The first clue comes from the design of the cars. Since they have door handles, it must be assumed that someone once used them to get inside. And since they also have wing mirrors that cannot be used by the cars themselves, someone must have been driving these cars at some point. In fact, in a universe without humans, the cars would have no need for doors at all, not to mention windows, since there would be no one inside to look through them for other traffic around them. Then there's the fact that all the cars speak English, which they could only have learned from the humans that once owned and drove them. When it was suggested that the cars may be living in a different universe, fans quickly pointed out that they seem to be living in a world that closely resembles Earth. And since they can sometimes be heard speaking in a Spanish accent, or seen decorating themselves with culture-specific items, it's more likely that they live in our reality, only post-humans. Signs that can be seen by the side of the road contain written English as well as other languages that could not have been created by the cars, since they don't have hands and likely never learned to write, further strengthening the case that people once existed in this world. Some people have suggested that the cars somehow absorbed the humans that were driving them, thereby becoming sentient and taking over the world one car at a time. The personalities that we see are actually those of the human owners that have been absorbed, and they now live their lives as cars. A different theory states that the cars became fed up with being slaves to humans, and so decided that we needed to be eradicated. Jay Ward, who's the creative director of the movie series, has stated that this theory makes a lot of sense to him, since sentient cars would likely see humans as burdens that just slow them down, prompting them to get rid of us. But he's reiterated that this is just his personal opinion and not that of Pixar. Other theories concerning the franchise suggest that the cars have their own form of organized religion, since it contains a Pope-mobile, suggesting that Catholicism is still very much alive and well. Another posits that we never see the car doors open because this would result in the car's innards being exposed and possibly falling out onto the road below, which is a grim thought. Lastly, it's been suggested that all the cars belong to Andy from Toy Story, and that all their adventures are actually part of his imagination, explaining why they have human characteristics. Number 1. From the very first time that it was aired in 1999, Ed, Edd and Eddy was considered by many viewers to be a very strange cartoon. It featured a group of children who all live along the same cul-de-sac. They never go to school, there never seem to be any adults around, though they are spoken about, and no one adheres to any rules, if they even exist. The characters are unique, and in some cases disturbing. Added to this was the strange animation style used to create the characters and the world around them, with some people stating that it made them feel uneasy. While adults had mixed feelings about the cartoon, it proved very popular among younger viewers, and today it's attained somewhat of a cult following among adults who enjoyed it when they were kids. But it did leave many questions unanswered. Where do they live? Who's looking after them and feeding them? Why aren't they in school? And why does it seem that one of the characters, Plank, is sentient despite being a piece of wood? It isn't surprising that the show has spawned many theories in an effort to answer these questions, and one has taken people by surprise since it seems to be uncannily accurate despite being very dark. It suggests that all of the children in the cul-de-sac are no longer alive, having lost their lives between 1900 and 2000, and that they're now in purgatory. Eddy is said to have been a swindler during the 1930s. Ed and Sarah, who are brother and sister, are said to have lived in the 50s, with Ed being a recluse who is obsessed with science fiction. Then there's Ed, or Double D as he's called by the other children, who grew up in a middle-class family during the 80s. The purgatory theory explains why we never see any adults in any of the episodes, and why they never have to attend school at any point, and it's as if they're living in an endless summer. While the group usually does its best to avoid hanging out with the Eds, they do have a common enemy in the Canker sisters, who live in a caravan on the edge of town. It's said that they represent the demons that torment the kids, and they're attracted to the Eds, since they're the weakest of the group, and hence make for easy prey. They're also said to possess certain powers that allow them to observe the entire cul-de-sac at once, and then appear whenever they want to when they're ready to attack. Each of the characters is said to have their own backstory, each more grim than the last, and we can only take solace in the fact that they seem to be blissfully unaware that they are, in fact, in purgatory. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.